Good morning, folks. This is Deb Delapiana, and this is your Chain Reaction Report. We're going to talk about the news media today. We're going to talk about what legitimate news media sources look like. We're going to talk about what journalists look like. There are some pretty ill-conceived notions out there in the land of the internet readers about what they are. Now, I subscribe to several legitimate news sources. I subscribe to the Boston Globe first and foremost. It's my local paper. It is owned by John Henry, who is the owner of also the Red Sox. And John Henry does not get involved in the day-to-day running of the newspaper. He has a managing editor who handles that. And certainly, I can promise you that the Boston Globe can be very critical of the Boston Red Sox in spite of the fact that they are owned by the same person. I've seen it all year long. So, the second newspaper that I subscribe to is my favorite newspaper, and that would be the Washington Post. Now, the Washington Post used to be owned by the Graham family back in the day when they broke the Watergate story. And we're going to go back and talk about this, but and they were sold to Jeff Bezos of Amazon, who you may or may not like, and I certainly don't like the man, but I can also tell you he does not influence the day-to-day operation of the Washington Post, because Marty Baron, who was the managing editor of the Boston Globe when they broke the Spotlight story, which was about the extent of the pedophile pre-scandal in the Boston area, also moved on to become the managing editor of the Washington Post. And he is and has been a brilliant managing editor wherever he has been. He retired just recently, and the Post appointed its first female managing editor. I subscribe to the Miami Herald. The Miami Herald is owned by McClatchy, and the Miami Herald is the newspaper that broke the Jeffrey Epstein story and actually did the most in-depth reporting on that event in our sordid history, which also won them awards. And I also subscribe to the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times. Now, over the past, I'd say since the 2016 election, the right wing, and I will say this here, Russian propaganda has done a number on the perception people have of the mainstream media. So let's talk. The mainstream media in America was originally run by wealthy families. You know, William Randolph Hearst, the Graham family. The New York Times is still owned by the Salzburger family, pretty much, even though they have actually morphed that into the New York Times Company, and they sell some shares here and there. And it takes a lot to run a paper. It costs a lot of money to run a paper. The real problem comes in with the way the Telecommunications Act of 1996 opened the door for, say, one guy to own a ton of papers and radio stations and TV outlets. The real problem is monopolies, not content control, quite frankly. Are there stories that don't get reported on that should be reported on? Yeah. That's why I also follow an outlet that that you give $5 a month to this outlet, and they report at the end of the year, they send you a book. And they talk about all the stories that kind of slip through the cracks. This is not anything new. It's not anything that has happened because of corporatization per se. There were things that the family owners didn't report on as well. Project Censored is the name of that effort. And, that way I get everything I need. I spend about 4 hours a day reading, okay? So let's talk about some of the alternative media out there, all right? By the way, I also do follow routinely and religiously every day Reuters and AP. They are the providers of straight-on, flat-out news that these guys then go out and investigate more on. ProPublica is another great source. But let's talk about pretenders to the throne, if you will. Let's talk about the Intercept, okay? Now, when Glenn Greenwald won his Pulitzer, he, contrary to what he wants you to think, he didn't win that alone. Usually when you win a Pulitzer Prize, you're part of a team. He was part of the Guardian team that won the Pulitzer Prize. He will tell you he won the Pulitzer Prize. He certainly did, but he was not alone in winning that prize. The Boston Globe Spotlight team won a Pulitzer Prize for their investigation of the pedophile priest scandal. There were about 6 reporters that comprised the Spotlight team, and they shared, along with Marty Baron, that award. The Washington Post, under Marty Baron, has won several Pulitzer Prizes. And it wasn't one reporter. It was a team of reporters. Barton Gellman was one of those reporters, and he won for Edward Snowden as well. So let's talk about the Intercept. Now, the Intercept is owned by the man who owns eBay. And he, unlike the other owners, went out and hired a bunch of yahoos. Okay, that's all I can say. Initially, it was Jeremy Scahill, Glenn Greenwald, and Laura Poitras. Now, they did a masterful job on Citizen 4. I recommend that movie about Edward Snowden very highly. But the whole deal is the Intercept was staffed by a bunch of egos and unmanageable egos. Matt Taibbi, all of these guys who were kind of like, fringe players as far as I'm concerned. For them, it was not so much about the news as it was about the money. Matt Taibbi was one of the first to leave and go to this outfit called Substack. Now, Matthew Iglesias is also there, and now Glenn Greenwald is there. But before I get into Substack, let me talk to you a little bit about the Intercept, which was originally the vision of Glenn Greenwald, Laura Poitras, and Jeremy Scahill. They went out and got themselves an investor. But the Intercept has a bad habit of not protecting its sources. And just for that reason alone, they're not a legitimate news source. There have been 3 people who have been exposed who sent them documents, who have paid the price for that. And that is a cardinal rule of being a real journalistic outfit, is protection of sources. The other thing that's important to note is that when the Globe was investigating Spotlight, and when the Washington Post was investigating the Pentagon Papers and Watergate, their editors and their legal teams were all involved in that. And they were pushed to have more than one corroborating source for every ounce of information they had. They were truly committed to producing the truth and to having the facts at their fingertips, so that there was no question. That is not the way the Intercept works, and that is certainly not Substack. Substack's owner has stated that he thinks it's more important that writers have a forum, and he doesn't care even if it's wrong or if they're not telling the truth. I have a real problem with that, and that's one of the reasons why I only read one person on Substack, and that's Judd Legume, who actually does do investigative work. If you want to be considered an investigative journalist, you literally have to go out and find sources and cultivate them and dig for information. Glenn Greenwald is not really doing that where he is. Now, he feigned being upset that the editors wouldn't publish a story on Biden and Burisma. So he went and he published it on Substack. I read that. I would not have published that story if I were a legitimate news source. You cannot publish speculation and be called a journalist. It just does not work that way. You can redefine whatever you want for the internet, but the fact of the matter is that Substack is a blogging site. All right? I have my own blogging site on WordPress. I don't consider myself an investigative reporter. I'm not out digging, cultivating sources, and pounding the pavement. Okay? I'm not. I'm an aggregator of information that I present to you. I don't claim to be a journalist. Okay? I don't. I'm trained in it, but I don't claim to be one because I don't practice the basic tenets that go with it, except for one thing. I will not post anything on my blog that I can't show a legitimate link to. I absolutely will not. But I didn't develop that link. So that's the difference. The real reason for going to Substack is because you have no editorial control there. You can post whatever you want, whenever you want. And by the way, you can monetize it and make money. Matt Taibbi is reportedly making $1 million a year from his subscribers. And that's one of the reasons why Glenn Greenwald went there. He was only making $500,000 a year at the Intercept. Now he can make unlimited amounts of money by bringing his subscribers with him. And no matter how much you like Caitlin Johnstone, she is also not an investigative journalist, nor is Whitney Webb. Okay? Nor is Whitney Webb, who writes for a number of places, one of which is The Last American Vagabond, who never produces any facts for anything he posts. There's a fine line between journalism and blogging, and it's called the truth. You could be an opinion writer, and you may not be telling the truth. That is your opinion, okay? And then let's talk about people like John Kiriakou and Chris Hedges, who have gravitated towards RT and Sputnik. So you're all worried about corporate media in America, but you're putting your faith in men who now write for RT and Sputnik. RT is 99.9% funded by Russian state government, as is Sputnik, because Sputnik is an offshoot of RT. And, supposedly, you're all waxing poetic about how they allow Chris Hedges and John Kiriakou and Lee Camp and who else is on there? There's a lot of people on there now. Abby Martin had a falling out and actually left. And I'll put an article in here about someone who worked for RT that actually tells you why he's no longer with RT. A man who was asked at his first interview, what if we asked you to report something that wasn't the truth? So the thing that amazes me is, yes, they are certainly allowed free reign in what they say, because every single one of them is criticizing the American government. Have you ever heard Chris Hedges, when he's on Contact, criticize Russia? Have you ever heard any of these people criticizing Russia? Have you ever heard Lee Camp criticizing Russia? You haven't. That's why they're allowed free reign, because they're criticizing the American government. And I criticize the American government, and that's fine, but please, let's not present this as something that it's not. Okay? Because the gentleman whose article I'm putting in here was asked to pursue something that he knew was propaganda and refused to do so. So, I'm going to suggest to you that if you've got a problem with U.S. corporate-owned media, but you don't have a problem with the people who are on RT and Sputnik thinking that they're truthers, then you are not critical thinkers. I would like to remind you that Vladimir Putin was a high-ranking KGB officer at one time. And he is the de facto dictator of Russia and the creator of RT. So, in closing, I feel as though maybe I left out Fox News. So let me say something about that as well. Anyone who would consider Fox News a legitimate news source is out of their ever-loving fucking minds. And Glenn Greenwald has spent a lot of time on Fox News. Not necessarily doing anything but spewing bullshit. And the fact of the matter is, according to him, he would be on other news sources, but they won't invite him. And maybe there's a reason for that. Because as we all know, Rupert Murdoch turns a blind eye to whatever Fox News does. Roger Ailes, who started Fox News, stated from the get-go that he did not care about the truth or facts. What he cared about was ratings. And that is what Rupert Murdoch cares about also, or he would not employ people like Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham. They are not investigative journalists. They are not even news reporters. They are hacks. Glenn Greenwald has taken up light housekeeping on Fox. Okay? And by the way, Russell Brand, he's another one. When Russell Brand is talking to you about the news and using Substack as his point of reference, he is not a journalist. He's also not a truth bringer. He's a talking head. Now, I'm not claiming to be any different, which sets me apart from them. I'm not monetized on YouTube. I'm not monetized on my blog. I have 5,000 people who follow my blog. And I don't take money from any of them. And that's all I claim to be. But it's time to understand here that there is a difference between real journalism and people who are just writing for money. And all of these sources, Substack, Medium, where you can monetize your content. I mean, people actually pay Candace Owens to fucking lie to them. She literally has never produced any factual evidence of anything she says. You know, when she professes to say that if the government has to talk to you so much about COVID-19, that means it doesn't exist. Where is the proof in any of that? There isn't any proof. Just like people who are posting on Facebook that the recent outage on Facebook was because the U.S. military took over. Where is the proof of that? If you're just blindly believing these idiots, you really cannot call yourself a critical thinker. Wake up, people. Seriously. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm going to close this out here because I have to be in work at 11 today, and this may not actually get published until tonight because I still have to put all of the references together. But we're going to be talking about this on the stream, and I suggest to you, if you can't tune in on Sunday night at 6 o'clock, that's fine, but you ought to at least be watching it. We are going to go into depth on RT and Sputnik. And that's why I'm not going to present a lot of that here. But we advise you to take a look at that. Because I'm going to suggest to you that the papers I subscribe to are much better sources for information than anything you're paying attention to on the alternative side. That's it for me. I will talk to you guys later. Have a nice one.